Void Linux is one of those operating systems that quietly exists on the edges of the Linux world, yet once people discover it, they often become deeply attached to it. To understand Void Linux properly, it helps to step back and look at what most Linux distributions try to do, and then see how Void deliberately chooses a different path. Void Linux is not based on any other major distribution like Debian, Ubuntu, Arch, or Fedora. It is an independent Linux distribution built from scratch, with its own package system, its own repositories, and its own philosophy. This independence is not just a technical detail. It shapes nearly every aspect of how Void Linux behaves, how it feels to use, and who it is best suited for. At its core, Void Linux aims to be simple, fast, stable, and flexible, without unnecessary abstractions getting in the way of the user. This does not mean it is simplistic or limited. In fact, Void Linux can be extremely powerful, but it expects the user to understand what they are doing or at least be willing to learn. Void does not try to hide Linux behind layers of automation or opinionated defaults. Instead, it provides clean tools and lets the user decide how their system should work. One of the first things that makes Void Linux stand out is its choice of init system. While most modern Linux distributions have adopted systemd, Void Linux uses Runit. Runit is a lightweight init system that is focused on simplicity, speed, and reliability. It starts services very quickly and manages them in a straightforward way. Each service is typically represented by a small directory containing scripts, and enabling or disabling a service is often as simple as creating or removing a symbolic link. There is no massive centralized configuration, no complex dependency resolution hidden behind layers of tooling. This makes the system more transparent. When something goes wrong, it is often easier to understand why, because there are fewer moving parts. Runit also influences how Void Linux feels during boot and shutdown. Boot times are typically very fast, even on older hardware. Services start in parallel where possible, and because Runit is minimal, it consumes very little memory and CPU time. For users who value performance, predictability, and low overhead, this alone can be a compelling reason to choose Void Linux. It is also appealing to users who prefer not to use systemd for philosophical or technical reasons. Another defining feature of Void Linux is its package management system, known as XBPS, which stands for X Binary Package System. XBPS is designed to be fast, reliable, and flexible. It supports both binary packages and source-based builds, which is relatively rare. Most distributions focus on one or the other. With Void, you can install pre-compiled binary packages quickly, or you can build packages from source using the same infrastructure, depending on your needs. XBPS handles dependencies efficiently and includes features like package verification using cryptographic signatures. This helps ensure that the packages you install are authentic and have not been tampered with. The package manager itself is command-line based and designed to be simple to script and automate. It does not try to be flashy or user-friendly in a graphical sense, but it is consistent and predictable. Once you learn its commands, managing software on Void Linux becomes very straightforward. Void Linux follows a rolling release model. This means that instead of releasing major versions every 6 months or every few years, Void continuously updates its packages. When you install Void Linux and keep it updated, you are always running a current system. This has advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, you get newer versions of software, kernel updates, and security patches without needing to perform major upgrades or reinstall the operating system. On the downside, rolling releases require a certain level of attentiveness from the user. While Void Linux is generally very stable for a rolling distribution, updates can occasionally introduce changes that require manual intervention or awareness. Stability in Void Linux is achieved not by freezing software for long periods, but by careful packaging and testing. The Void Linux developers tend to be conservative when it comes to pushing potentially disruptive changes. Packages are tested before being added to the main repositories, and serious breakages are relatively rare. That said, Void assumes that users are comfortable reading update notes, understanding basic system concepts, and troubleshooting when necessary. It is not a distribution designed to hold the user's hand at every step. Another important aspect of Void Linux is its support for multiple C libraries. Most Linux distributions use the new C library, commonly known as glibc. Void Linux supports both glibc and musl. Musl is a lightweight alternative C library that emphasizes simplicity, correctness, and static linking. The musl-based version of Void Linux is especially popular among users who want minimal systems, containers, or environments where predictability and small size are important. Having official support for both glibc and musl is relatively unusual and demonstrates Void's commitment to flexibility and choice. This dual libc approach does mean that there are effectively two parallel ecosystems within Void Linux. Packages built against glibc are not interchangeable with those built against musl. However, Void manages this complexity well by providing separate repositories and installation images. Users can choose which version they want at install time, and for most use cases, either option works very well. Installation of Void Linux is another area where its philosophy becomes clear. Void provides both live images with an installer and more minimal base images. The installer is text-based or minimally graphical depending on the image, and it focuses on letting the user make explicit choices. You select your disk layout, file systems, locale, keyboard, network configuration, and software selection. There are fewer presets compared to beginner-friendly distributions. This can feel intimidating at first, but it also means that the resulting system is exactly what you asked for, with no hidden surprises. After installation, you typically start with a relatively minimal system. From there, you install and configure the desktop environment, window manager, or server software you want. Void Linux does not push a particular desktop environment. It supports all major ones like XFCE, GNOME, KDE Plasma, and others, but it also works extremely well with lightweight window managers like i3BSPWM, OpenBox, and similar setups. This makes it popular among users who enjoy customizing their workflows and building their system piece by piece. Documentation is an interesting topic when it comes to Void Linux. Void has its own official documentation, often referred to as the Void Handbook. This documentation covers installation, package management, system configuration, service management, and many other topics. The documentation is generally clear and concise, but it assumes a basic level of Linux knowledge. It does not shy away from technical explanations, and it often expects the user to read carefully and understand what they are doing. In addition to official documentation, many Void users rely on general Linux knowledge and resources, since Void follows standard Unix conventions in many areas. The community around Void Linux is relatively small compared to giants like Ubuntu or Fedora, but it is active and knowledgeable. Because Void attracts users who are interested in understanding their system deeply, community discussions often focus on technical details, performance, and best practices. Support is typically provided through forums, chat platforms, and issue trackers. While the smaller community means fewer beginner-friendly tutorials, it also means that discussions tend to be focused and informative. Security in Void Linux is handled through timely updates and a clean design. The rolling release model allows security patches to be delivered quickly. Void also avoids unnecessary background services and complexity, which can reduce the attack surface of the system. Users are expected to take responsibility for their system's security, such as configuring firewalls, managing permissions, and understanding which services are running. Again, this aligns with Void's philosophy of empowering the user rather than abstracting everything away. One of the less obvious but important strengths of Void Linux is consistency. Configuration files are generally located where you expect them to be. Services are managed in a uniform way. Packages are built with similar conventions. This consistency makes it easier to reason about the system as a whole. Over time, many users find that Void Linux feels predictable and calm compared to distributions that frequently introduce new tools, layers, or paradigms. Void Linux also tends to avoid unnecessary patching or heavy customization of upstream software. Where possible, it ships software in a form that is close to upstream defaults. This reduces surprises and makes it easier to follow upstream documentation. When patches are applied, they are usually minimal and clearly justified. This approach appeals to users who value transparency and want to understand how their software works. From a performance perspective, Void Linux is often praised for being fast and responsive. This is partly due to Runit, partly due to the lack of heavy background services, and partly due to the ability to build very lean systems. On older hardware or low-resource systems, Void can feel significantly snappier than more heavyweight distributions. On modern hardware, the benefits are still noticeable in terms of boot times, service management, and overall system responsiveness. It is important to be honest about who Void Linux is for and who it is not for. Void Linux is not the best choice for absolute beginners who have never used Linux before and want something that works out of the box with minimal learning. It is also not ideal for users who want extensive graphical configuration tools or automated system management. Void Linux expects you to be comfortable with the command line, reading documentation, and making informed decisions. On the other hand, Void Linux is an excellent choice for intermediate to advanced Linux users who want control, performance, and simplicity. It is well suited for developers, system administrators, hobbyists, and anyone who enjoys learning how their system works under the hood. It can be used as a desktop operating system, a server platform, or even as a base for specialized systems. Over time, many Void Linux users describe a sense of trust in the system. Because it changes gradually and predictably, and because the tools are straightforward, users often feel more confident making modifications and updates. There is less fear that an update will completely change how the system works. This sense of stability is not about being static, but about being coherent. In summary, Void Linux is an independent, rolling release Linux distribution that emphasizes simplicity, speed, and user control. Its use of the Runit init system, the XBPS package manager, and its support for both glibc and musl set it apart from most other distributions. It does not try to appeal to everyone, but for those who appreciate its philosophy, Void Linux can be a deeply satisfying operating system to use and learn from. It represents a vision of Linux that values clarity over convenience, understanding over automation, and flexibility over rigid design. For many users, once they adapt to Void Linux, it becomes not just another distribution but a long-term home for their computing needs.